I never told this publicly, and if you had asked me before that night, I would say that this kind of thing simply doesn't exist, that these are stories people make up to give meaning to fear or to the unknown. But the problem is that what I saw didn't stay only in my head. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination caused by exhaustion, because a few hours later, 5 people died, one after the other, in sequence, in the same place where that woman went. And since then, I can no longer ignore the feeling that it wasn't a coincidence, that I witnessed something that was not supposed to be seen, something that happens silently, without anyone noticing, until it's too late. That day, I was completely destroyed inside. It was that kind of exhaustion that builds up little by little until you can't function properly anymore. Personal problems, sleepless nights, thoughts that never stop. A constant feeling that everything is going wrong at the same time. And in the middle of all of that, I was still on shift, trying to act as if everything was normal, trying to maintain control, but there comes a point when the mind simply can't take it anymore. So I did the only thing I could do at that moment. I stepped away a little, sat alone in the room, in silence, with the lights low, trying to breathe deeply, trying to calm my mind, as if staying there still for a few minutes would be enough to reorganize everything that was collapsing inside me. It was in that silence that something changed. It wasn't a noise, it wasn't a step, it wasn't a door opening. It was that strange feeling that appears out of nowhere, as if the environment had become heavier, as if the air had changed. And even before I opened my eyes, I already knew that something was wrong. My whole body became tense, a cold ran up my spine. And when I finally looked toward the door, she was already there, standing, completely motionless, staring at me as if she had been there for a long time, waiting for that exact moment. She was small. She must have been at most about 5 feet tall, her hair completely white, thin, messy, thrown back in a careless way, as if no one had touched it for days, maybe years. And she was wearing grey clothing, simple, old, something that did not match that environment. It was not a uniform, it was not the clothing of a common patient. It looked more like an old nightgown, the kind you don't see anymore, as if she had come from another era and simply appeared there, displaced, out of context. But none of that caused me as much impact as her eyes, because that was not normal. It was an intense blue. Too intense, too deep, too alive, a gaze that did not seem human, as if it was passing through you, as if it was not seeing you from the outside, but from the inside. I was completely paralyzed, unable to react, unable to speak, and we stayed staring at each other for a time that doesn't make sense to explain, because it felt much longer than it really was, until my gaze went down and I noticed something that made everything even more wrong. Her feet were bare, covered in dirt, a dark, heavy dirt, as if she had come from a completely different place from that hospital, and that did not match the rest of her body, because from the waist up she was clean, intact, without any mark, without any sign of wear, as if they were 2 parts that did not belong to the same person. Then she spoke, and it was at that moment that everything inside me froze completely, because her voice had no hurry, no emotion, no doubt. It was too calm, too cold, too direct, like someone who is only stating something that had already been decided a long time ago. And the words were simple, but heavy enough to stay engraved in my mind until today. It is not your time, yet. And when I heard that, something inside me sank, because it did not sound like a threat. It did not sound like a common warning. It sounded like a statement. I stood up almost automatically, trying to find a logical explanation, trying to convince myself that that was just a person who should not be there. Maybe someone from the psychiatric ward who had left without supervision. Anything that would allow me to maintain control of the situation. So I spoke to her. I tried to act normally. I said that she could not be there, that she needed to go back, but she did not respond. She did not show any reaction. She just slowly turned and began to walk toward the staircase that led directly to the ICU, and there was something deeply wrong in the way she moved. It was not hesitation, it was not confusion, it was direction. It was purpose, as if every step had already been defined, even before happening. I went after her without thinking twice, first trying to remain calm, then speeding up my pace, because that was no longer just a matter of procedure. There was a growing sensation that I needed to reach her before it was too late. I called her again. I spoke louder, but she continued completely, ignoring my presence, without turning her face, without slowing down, just moving forward. And then she began to climb the stairs, slowly, one step at a time, without any hurry, as if time had no importance. And it was at that moment that I realized that, even walking faster, I was not able to reduce the distance between us. When she reached the turn of the stairs, I practically ran to reach her before she disappeared from my field of vision. I did not blink. I did not look away. I did not lose sight of her at any moment. And even so, in the instant that she made the turn, she simply ceased to exist. There was no sound. There was no abrupt movement. There was no place where she could have gone. She just was not there anymore, as if she had been erased from reality. I stopped in the middle of the stairs, completely still, looking at an empty space that made no sense to be empty, trying to understand what had just happened, my brain refusing to accept that. And even so, I ran upstairs. I searched in all possible places. I checked every room, every corridor, every space where someone could hide, but there was absolutely no one. It was as if she had never been there, as if everything had happened only to me. I went down and went straight to talk to the nurses. I described everything with as much detail as possible: the height, the white hair, the gray clothing, the blue eyes, the dirty bare feet. I was sure that someone would recognize her, that someone would say they had seen that woman somewhere, but no one had seen, no one knew, no one had even gone through anything similar on that shift. And it was at that moment that the feeling changed completely. It stopped being doubt, it stopped being confusion, and it became real fear. That kind of fear that does not come from something you understand, but exactly from what you cannot explain. About an hour later, the first ICU patient died, and that could have been just a coincidence, something normal within an environment like that. But it did not stop there. Shortly after, another died, then another, and another. 5 people in total, on the same day, at different times, but close enough to seem like a sequence, as if they were not isolated events, as if they were connected in some invisible way. And while I watched that happening, while the numbers increased and the atmosphere of the place became heavier and heavier, there was only one thing that did not leave my mind: her voice, repeating in exactly the same way, with the same calmness, with the same certainty. "It is not your time yet." And it was at that moment that I understood something that I really wanted to be wrong. Because accepting that meant accepting that what I saw was real, that that was not a lost person, it was not a mistake, it was not someone who entered where they should not. She was not there by chance, she was not looking for help, she was not confused, she was going to a specific place with a specific objective. And I had the most disturbing sensation I have ever felt in my entire life, the sensation that I did not witness an invasion, I witnessed a choice. And on that day, for some reason that I will never understand, she decided that I was not one of them. After that night, I tried to move on as if nothing had happened. I tried to convince myself that that had been just exhaustion, just pressure, just my mind playing tricks on me, but that did not last long. Because a few days later, people started to talk about a specific ward, a place that almost no one liked to mention, called Ward 2, which stayed locked most of the time, isolated, used only when the hospital was under renovation or when they needed to improvise space. And it was there that I heard something that immediately made me remember the woman on the stairs, because they told me, with a frightening naturalness, that every time the door of that ward opened and closed by itself, without wind, without anyone nearby, that was not just a strange phenomenon, it was a warning. At first I did not take it seriously, because this kind of thing becomes a joke among those who work a long time in hospitals, a way to relieve the constant weight of death. But everything changed on the day that I witnessed that personally, because there was no wind, there was no airflow, the heat was heavy, the environment completely still, and even so, the door of Ward 2 began to move, slowly, creaking, opening, and then closing with force, a single movement, dry, precise, as if something invisible had pushed it. And at that moment, no one said anything, but everyone noticed. Everyone looked at each other with that expression that mixes fear with denial, until someone said in a low voice, almost as if confirming something that no one wanted to admit, on that same day, one person died in the medical clinic, and I still tried to ignore it. I tried to fit that as a coincidence, but it did not take long for it to happen again, on another shift, at another moment. The same door, the same impossible movement, opening and closing by itself, this time twice in a row, and the sound echoing through the empty corridor, as if it was marking something, as if it was counting. And that was exactly what happened, because on that day there were 2 deaths, and that was when everything started to fit together in a way that I did not want to accept, because it was no longer a story, it was no longer a rumor, it was a pattern, something repetitive, something that happened before, not after, as if that was not reacting to death, but anticipating. And it was then that it finally hit me in a way that I could no longer ignore, because the memory came back strongly. The woman, the blue eyes, the dirty feet, the staircase leading directly to the ICU, the phrase that she said, and what happened right after, 5 deaths in sequence. And at that instant, I understood something that completely took the ground from under me, something that to this day I try not to think about when I am alone. Because if that is true, it changes everything we understand about life and death. That door was not warning, it was responding to her passage, as if each time it opened and closed, it was marking those who had already been chosen. And the most disturbing thing is not knowing that that exists. It is not knowing that something walks through that hospital deciding who is going to die. The most disturbing thing is remembering what she told me, because that was not a warning, it was an exception. And since that day I cannot stop thinking that at some point she will come back, and next time, maybe she will not say the same thing.